Hello everyone, welcome back to the Property Regeneration Show. Today we are interviewing Nimbus, and should we start off by you introducing yourself to everyone?
Yeah, hi, I'm Paul Davis from Nimbus Maps. We're a property information platform. I guess we'll talk about that in a little while.
Okay, and would you like to tell people your position within Nimbus and
Yes.
a little bit of history of how you were founded?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
When you were founded as well.
Yeah. So I'm Paul. I'm one of the co-founders at Nimbus. We set up Nimbus about sort of 4 or 5 years ago, and it span out of some work we were doing before that. So we had a property development consultancy business before that, and what was kind of interesting about that business was that we were advising pub companies on how to change the use of their assets. So back in the day when there were sort of smoking bans and this sort of stuff, and kind of pubs closing down all the time, we were trying to help the pub companies to understand which pubs were going to trade well and which ones weren't going to trade well. Off the back of the ones that weren't going to trade well, how do you reposition them and get them from being empty and tired and sort of run down and stuff. And so we developed some technology to allow us to do that. And then we found that was really interesting, and we started to then look at saying, well, rather than doing on a pub estate, so we sort of one point did about 10,000 pub reviews of 10,000 pubs. We started to say, well, actually, could we apply that across the whole of the UK? And it turns out we can, and hence Nimbus Maps. Nimbus Maps appeared as a product in the marketplace.
Okay, and from your experience and with it out in the market now, were there similar platforms that were being exercised at the time, or was this something niche that you'd discovered and wanted to get out there to the wider market?
Yeah, it was something that we discovered really. So back in about 2012, 2013, there was a sort of a European directive that asked all the countries across Europe to release information about their property and their sort of the cadastral, in effect, kind of all of the ownership they got across the UK and this sort of stuff. And that kind of gave us sort of an opening to start doing what we were doing for the pub companies. And there was nobody really else out there. So we were kind of a small niche development consultancy that were kind of helping on these sort of projects in effect. And that's kind of where it kind of came from, if you like. But the data wasn't there available, so there's kind of nobody else doing it at the time, and it was kind of interesting ways of approaching it, really.
Okay, because before I'd heard about Nimbus, I was more accustomed to land registry, which I'm sure a number of our listeners are as well. So how did Nimbus as a company in a sense advance the tools that land registries currently provides, and how would people see the benefit of switching from land registry to Nimbus?
Yeah, absolutely. So this time to go back in 2012, 2013 is when the land registry started to release data. So there's kind of bits and pieces of data that the land registry release, and that's kind of where all this started, really. What we now have is we have a complete copy of all of the ownership across the UK. So we have kind of all the title plans, if you like, across the whole of the UK. So in effect, when you're searching with land registry, often you'll be searching through an address and a postcode and all that sort of stuff. It's slightly difficult to kind of often visualize that when you've got a list of properties and this sort of stuff you sort of that you want out of, in effect. Nimbus Maps at its core has all that ownership information sort of sat in the background, and then you can interface it through a map, which is much more intuitive than we believe, than sort of trying to pick it out off a list, in effect. So we've got an address where you don't kind of know what that piece of land is, or isn't even an address on that piece of land. You start doing index map search and this sort of stuff, where you've got to kind of sort of draw areas of the map and send it into the land registry and this sort of stuff. So it can be quite difficult sometimes to get that ownership from the land registry. And Nimbus kind of makes that so much easier. And then with Nimbus, what we then also do is we bring other information together and present that at the same time. So typically on any kind of development or investment, or if you're buying or selling or developing properties, you're going to start with that kind of red line around a plan, and that's the sort of the land registry piece.
Yeah.
Then you're then going to move from there and start saying, well, how big is it? Is it big enough for what I want? Is it the right kind of size and shape? And that then means move into traditionally other products, other websites to try and answer those questions. You start saying, well, is there a planning history around it? Is there planning constraints? Are there leases granted on that title that I kind of need to know whether that, if I'm trying to develop something, is there a lease going to stop me doing that, and this sort of stuff. And that's when Nimbus then becomes powerful, because it brings all that together for you. So in one place, you can kind of access all of that information in effect. So it really sort of seamlessly takes you through ownership and kind of allows you to access that so much more quickly. The land registry often revolves around forms and filling stuff in and writing checks and sending them off to this sort of stuff. And we sort of cut through all of that, 'cause it's all kind of online and digital and automated and quick in effect. And then as we say, we overlay this other information into it. So things like all of the properties are pre-measured on Nimbus, so you haven't got to go off and measure them again and say, well, actually, is that big what I want to do? It's all there for you in a sort of easy to digest way, if that makes sense. And then you can then do some other clever stuff when you start saying, well, once you've found something that you're interested in, sort of the pre-qualifying of that. So what are the constraints that sort of sit alongside that? Are properties listed, are they flood, all that kind of stuff. All of that, again, is within Nimbus. It sort of takes you that first bit around ownership and then sort of moves it on to the next level in effect, and allows you to start to move sort of at its most basic. It sort of saves you time rather than going to those different places to try and pull information together, trying to find planning to go off to the planners, trying to find if it's to go off to Historic England, all those kind of things. It just makes it kind of very quick and easy to do.
And whilst on that topic, that transition from ownership to planning, there's the Nimbus platform somehow sync in with the planning portal, because some people might be saying, well, why can't I just continue going to the planning portal, just type in the site address to get a planning history of that site? How does Nimbus encompass that information to give the user, the platform, ease that they're actually getting access to the latest information?
Yeah, totally. So Nimbus as a platform accesses about 1,000 different websites every night, sort of checks information on it and sort of brings it all together. So in that kind of list of 1,000 websites, there'll be all the planning websites and the planning portals that sort of form part of that. And absolutely, you can go off and you can sort of pull some of that information together. If you're looking for a single property, then you can go and you can type that address into whichever council's website it is and look at the information around that and sort of dig around into that. So at its most basic, that's where Nimbus kind of makes that quicker for you. The powerful bit then comes when you start saying, well, with that information to hand, you can then look at it in different ways. So the kind of things that are harder on council websites are then sort of saying, well, actually, if I'm interested in residential development, I'm interested in converting offices to residential, or I'm interested in, converting an office into student accommodation or something like that.
Yeah.
And then with Nimbus, the access through to the things like planning comps or kind of picking out the buildings that then might match and might work for those particular types of properties then becomes much more powerful. So as I say, kind of at a basic level, it sort of saves you time sort of finding this stuff. But actually then at the sort of the more powerful end of it, it then allows you to kind of cut and carve that in different ways and say, well, actually, I want to go and target this particular sector. So now show me the information around that sector and show me where I might find comps, so valuation, I might find comps, or if I want to go and submit this planning application, where do I find a similar planning application to understand how that process might go through?
Okay. And you mentioned that it's a powerful tool for investors.
Yeah.
Do you, or have you found that it's also a powerful tool for the traditional design team or project team in harvesting information? Like, for instance, thinking about architects, when they normally get a brief, they do the initial site analysis. Yeah. Have you got a history of any of your current users who are coming from that background of design?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So some of the key users are around that kind of area. So planners, architects, developers, builders, those sorts of people. So you've got the professionals that sort of support the developers, if you like, and the developers themselves too. So it sort of speeds up that access to information for the architects and the sort of the planners on that kind of, what am I designing? How's that going to work? How do I then present that to the council to get the right output, the right answer to my planning application, in effect. Make sure I'm getting consent rather than refusals. There's lots of that goes on. Kind of, is this property listed? Is the one next door listed? Is there kind of something there that's kind of important? Does it flood? I've got to kind of put flood risk assessments in as part of it. All of that is kind of covered within that platform. Absolutely.
And do you have like a ratio of the public sector as opposed to the private sector who are using this platform? Is there one sector that's using it more than the other?
Yeah, I think that the public sector aren't using it huge amounts. I think the key uses are around property investors, developers, and then the professionals that sort of sit alongside that, whether that's the agents or anybody buying and selling land and buildings and investments, all of that kind of stuff. All of those kind of people use the system kind of regularly. Public sector, we do have people using it from the estates teams and this sort of stuff, and some of the people sort of trying to plan strategically around the council and that sort of stuff. We do have users for that, but more in that kind of development piece and kind of trying to say, well, where are those parcels of land that we should be trying to unlock, and how do they fit together?
And these developers and investors you've mentioned, are these coming from small size businesses, medium or large? What is the ratio of the usage between the different sides of the organizations?
Yeah, so we've got everybody from, well, in fact, we've got people right at the very sort of start of their development journey in many ways. So it's sort of buy-to-let investors kind of saying, well, actually, I've got a few buy-to-lets. Actually, wouldn't it be nice to buy a buy-to-let but with a side garden? I could try and get some planning permission to extend and get a second unit on it, in effect. So buy something for what it's worth and get an additional unit on. So we've got lots of people using it for that kind of thing, kind of just starting to get into that development and planning sort of value add kind of piece. Lots of commercial investors, lots of commercial developers. It's really powerful around that, kind of looking at leases and commercial comps and lots of different ways in which to find those commercial comps, whether that's around specific occupiers and some of those difficult places to find those comps historically, kind of where do I find a comp for a quick fit garage, kind of historically been very difficult. Nowadays with Nimbus maps, it's really straightforward to go and do all of that stuff. And then sort of moving into the sort of the more mainstream sort of middle tier, if you like, of developers and investors, lots and lots of that, and I think sort of the bigger those assets become, there's kind of lots of different features then that open up around those, sort of looking at in those bigger estates of how do I asset sweat those I've got an office going empty, what do I do with it next? Do I re-let it as an office? Do I make it, let's say, going to student accommodation? Do I redevelop it for residential? Kind of what do I do with it? That stuff opens up at the same time. And then also kind of I've got an offer through from whatever it is, Tesco or whatever. How do I know I can sort of push those heads of terms harder or not? All of that's sort of there's kind of huge amounts of that's kind of helpful. But then right up to some of the big agency firms, they've got sort of nationwide access. A lot of companies that have kind of a national requirement. So lots of the big kind of retailers, lots of the big agents, kind of the surveying firms and stuff, again, have sort of company-wide access to the platform, really. And I suppose that it's kind of core. It's that kind of how do you have local knowledge when you've got a national requirement? It's kind of sort of breaking that problem that historically has been so difficult. How do I get knowledge nationally? Well, what is local knowledge? And really, it's a combination of understanding of values and demands and around planning and ownership and those sorts of things, and all of that stuff actually is encapsulated within Nimbus, and that's kind of, I suppose, where it can become very, very powerful, is that kind of, let's say, that kind of local knowledge on a national scale.
So when you say national scale, is that covering the UK wide, or is it England, Pacific, excluding Scotland, Wales and Ireland?
Yes, so it's England and Wales, so anywhere that the Land Registry covers at the moment. It may well go further in due course, but some of the Scottish, the Registry of Scotland don't have the same level of access to their information that Land Registry does, and sort of the ownership bit is kind of a key starting point for most people. So we haven't moved up into Scotland yet, but I'm sure that may come soon.
And Ireland and Wales?
So Wales is covered, Ireland at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. Burning question that I've been meaning to ask. We're going to go through this later, but in terms of the success of Nimbus, where do you find it in terms of like the scale of the projects, whether it's small, medium, or large? Is it right across the spectrum, or is there specific scalable size of a project that is proving very successful for your users when using Numbers?
Yeah, so there are 3 products that we've got, and I think all of them have their place to make a user successful, if you like. And so at that sort of small end, as I sort of said, kind of an investor trying to move from, I've got a little buy-to-let portfolio, how do I then move that into and start sort of moving into development kind of with low risk, because I guess that first step into development can be tricky. We've got a huge number of people that often they kind of go on some of the sort of development training seminars, things like that, and they come out of that and then come across and use Nimbus, and often come to our training days where we help them kind of implement that. So sort of right down to that sort of, dare I say it, sort of small level, the kind of the individual investor that wants to become a developer. Huge success with that, because with any kind of subscription with Nimbus, typically you can very happily find a site a month and do a deal on a site a month very, very happily, and that often kind of bridges that gap from the small investor through to actually kind of medium-sized development companies, actually, because a deal a month is usually quite a lot for most companies. And then so sort of if it's just ownership and a bit of planning constraints, then the Essentials, the free platform, covers a lot of that off very easily for people. The Elite platform then in effect will get you a site a month, and that then is very powerful for most people, because actually sort of achieving that sort of level kind of way in excess of where most of the users of Nimbus have been before they started with Nimbus. And sort of up into that much bigger scale, then we have this site finding service, which in effect allows the user, if you like, although it's sort of it's run offline, it's run sort of through our data team here in our sort of technical team. It allows them to go off and search much bigger parts of the country. So we've done some really interesting stuff recently for much bigger companies, where one in particular, sort of a big London fund that had just raised an awful lot of cash, actually, and they were looking for well-located, underdeveloped industrial sites. Obviously, industrial's hot at the moment, so where do I find those well-located sheds that I can kind of buy and extend, or buy and refurb and sell on, in effect? I did a really interesting piece of work around that, sort of defining what well-located mean, defining what low density meant, and then bringing back a list of those sites. And they now are sending out 400 letters a week at the moment, and getting about 15% response rate. There's kind of 60 new off-market opportunities sort of coming into their business on a weekly basis, which then allowing to put this money to work, in effect, and to invest it and sort of driving their business. So right through from, I want 2 or 3 deals done this year, thanks very much, to add to my buy-to-let portfolio. That is bread and butter, easy to do, thanks very much. Whether you do that on a course or come to our training day, and we'll show you how to do that with Elite. It's kind of 8 ways you find land with Elite, right the way up to big London funds that have raised a load of money and just raised their new fund and want to go and invest that in a particular type of asset, and that site finding service supporting that. And they had sort of about 10,000 properties off the back of it, and so they're sort of working through that at 400 a week, in effect. So kind of right the way through sort of this sort of both ends of the scale, really. It works well. And I suppose where it came from was that sort of that pub site. How do I find opportunities in 6,000 pubs? It's a similar sort of thing, really.
Okay. And what is the price range between the standard and Elite? I'm sure a lot of our listeners are perhaps wanting to know.
Yeah, so the free version is obviously free. The only thing you pay for that is there's every now and again you might want to buy a title plan or title register. Not very often, but sometimes you do. And then you pay £3, the same as going to the land registry to go and get it, but you just do it through us. It's easier, in effect. The sort of the more powerful version, the premium version, which we call Nimbus Maps Elite, that's £110 a month or £875 a year. And that then will, in effect, will power you to go and find and in effect transact on a deal a month, frankly. So anything up
Yeah.
to that sort of level, if you need less than that, it's plenty. If you want more than that, then that site finding service will kick in, and we can kind of help at that level. And then typically those sorts of searches are somewhere between sort of bottom end, sort of £500, £750 per search, and some of it they can go up significantly from there, depending on how difficult it is, that sort of the challenge that the customer sets in effect.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you. We will now probably be able to get a demonstration of perhaps eight ways to find and develop opportunities using Nimbus. Perhaps doing the free platform and then doing the elite platform, so people could get an idea of what they get from the two platforms and the limitations on a free platform.
Yeah, certainly. Let's just switch you across then. So let's just share my screen here, if that's okay. So hopefully you can see that. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, fabulous. So this is my screen here. This is actually our elite version rather than our essentials version. The way that it works is that you sort of type in a search at the top and click search. The system then goes off and finds that location and plots it in the map in effect. So as I sort of said before, what I was kind of looking for, if I just click on a title here, that'll bring up my left-hand side panel. And in effect, this is sort of the base bit of the functionality I was talking about, where you sort of have ownership information. There's your sort of site boundary. You've got details around the owner and this sort of stuff, and then down through to site sizes and building footprints, and what is the size of that particular building that we're looking at. So it's 3,000 square feet, and there's the planning history around it and this sort of stuff, and all of that kind of good stuff that we were sort of talking about.
Yeah.
The first way to sort of find land. So I've sort of started here on. I'm just going to try and see if I can close that. Hopefully I won't get rid of you if I do that. I've just sort of started in. This is in Birmingham. Let's swing around and sort of show you where we are. So this is kind of the Coventry Road going into Birmingham in effect. Now I'll just kind of show you some of the ways in which you can find land. We might struggle to get through 8 in sort of 20 minutes, but we'll sort of do a few of them in effect.
Sure.
So one of the things that we do is we have this filters section here, and that's one of the obvious things to do is sort of when you're looking for land in a commercial example, in a commercial scenario, saying, well, actually, if I'm looking for a drive-through, similar sites to a drive-through in effect, one of the things you can do is you can go and find out where the drive-throughs are, and then go and look around those for properties that are of the right size.
Yeah.
So we have this sort of site size filter down here. For some reason, I can't get rid of the. There we go. It's got rid of that now. In effect, what I can do in the filters here is I can sort of set a site size. So show me only stuff that's bigger than half an acre, because typically KFC and Mackie D's and people like that want half an acre or more. So what I can then do is I can click search, and then the system then goes off and just shows me those properties that are big enough for that use, if you like.
Yeah.
So then from there we can go and start looking at viabilities. So we can kind of click on each of those titles and see what information is on them. So we just kind of scroll down here. We've got sites 1.7 acres and sort of details of the rates assessments that kind of show us the information around that particular property. So in this case, probably not particularly exciting, but maybe sort of look at some of the stuff next door and things like that. So sort of number one is kind of looking at those sort of site size and then sort of re-qualifying off the back of that. What we can see here, we've got these little L's that are shown on here, and that's showing us is actually that there's a lease in place from 1991 to Vanguard Motors, and then probably a second lease here, which has now superseded that to Enterprise Limited.
And all this has been pulled in through land registry, I assume.
That's right, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
right.
And we can then go and buy copies of those. So if I want to go and get a copy of the lease of the property next door, which I might want to do because I want to go and look at Enterprise Rent-A-Cars in Birmingham to see what kind of the lease comps might be, then I can just buy that through the platform. So whereas if I was going to buy a lease through land registry, it would be much more difficult to go and do that and get copies of it. With us, you just kind of click it, put it in your basket, it goes up into here, and off we go in effect. So kind of all really quick and easy to do that in effect. So kind of number one way of finding land is sort of searching by site size. We can do the same with companies as well. So if I just click on this particular property here, we can see sort of M&B own the property here. So I guess could you look at redeveloping the back here for residential or something like that?
Yeah.
In essence, the second way of finding land is looking at kind of densities and sort of understanding kind of where those sort of low density sites might be. And so with Elite, we have this this master map view where in effect sort of these parcels of underdeveloped land become very easy to sort of see and dig out, if you like.
Yeah.
So in essence, going to be, I want to look at coming sort of in through the back here. In effect, I'm just going to reset my filters and show you that. 2 seconds.
Sure.
Reset those and update.
It's a very powerful tool. I'm thinking it'll be immensely beneficial to the public sector in trying to find land to meet the government's target for housing, because having worked for a number of developers and knowing that a lot of them are in need of a lot of land to build on, and a tool like this just speeds up the process.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Why do you think it is that they perhaps are not using this tool? Is it probably lack of knowledge that this tool is out there, or there other red tape or restrictions that perhaps is preventing that sector from using this tool?
Yeah, public sector wise, I think probably a combination of both really. It's lack of knowledge, it's getting budgets together to do it, and this sort of thing that often stands in the way of that. Private sector is adopting it very quickly, and you can kind of see why. Really, it allows you to find this stuff kind of very quickly and very easily.
Yeah.
And really, kind of, it's around sort of these sorts of things as well, which are kind of obvious, where you sort of have infill at the back in effect, and you sort of it's all very kind of quick to go and do that. Sort of putting stuff in on the edges and these sorts of things kind of are pretty kind of quick and easy to do. Frankly, it's kind of this sort of stuff, isn't it? Where they've sort of done that and it's sort of saying, well, could you do that over there? And this sort of stuff. It's all kind of quite quick to pick out, frankly.
Do you think it's a case of maybe, I'm not sure how your licensing works. So let's say there's a huge developer, leading developer nationwide in the UK, and they want to use this tool. Is it a case that you have one license for one person, or is it a license that you roll out across the whole organization? And is there like a price incentive in place for however number licenses they have?
Yeah, so there's a price which is £75 for a single user. Same price for the second user, and there's a discounted rate for 3 or more, which is £650 a year. So for each of those users on top, that's the price that they pay. It's quite simple pricing, really.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'll let you carry on. Sorry.
Yeah. So
digressed a bit.
1 and 2 ways of finding land are those two. One of the things we often find then is looking at things like company portfolios. So let's just have a think about that. So what we have here is we have a sort of a company search where I can in effect type in a company name, and one of the companies that I think is probably the most canvas company in the world, I think, is Travis Perkins. So obviously Travis Perkins have a portfolio, if you like, of roadside type properties in effect. So with Nimbus, what you can do is you can go off and search the Travis Perkins estate in effect. So this is showing me that Travis Perkins, the company that I selected, is part of the Travis Perkins PLC group, and sort of scroll through and see all the bits and pieces they've got. And within that, there's 2,000 titles that company owns, or that group owns rather, 1,900 are commercial and 300 are residential in effect. I can then plot that on the map, and I can then export that into Excel. And in terms of finding land, then obviously this is kind of interesting, because I might want to go and approach Travis Perkins as most developers do want to go and approach Travis Perkins. Something like, I'm just going to zoom out a second. Let me just toggle out onto the satellite view. There we go. So that's the sort of Travis Perkins estate as you sort of look across the UK in effect. Which then I can export into Excel too. And what that's kind of giving me is, A, can I go and target Travis Perkins to go and buy something off them? Number 2 is, well, actually, if Travis Perkins are those kind of roadside operators in the same way KFC are, could I go and buy something around those locations? They're kind of alerting me to locations where there could be similar kind of stock that could be interesting for me. And so number 3, I suppose, is in that kind of, well, actually, if I've got a Travis Perkins and I'm trying to do a rent review with them, kind of what will Travis Perkins pay on the on that lease in effect, I can go and find that through my sort of exports over here, where I can export that into Excel.
Okay.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, it does, for sure.
Yeah. Cool.
Right. So where are we now? We've just covered three ways.
We've covered 3 ways so far. I can keep going if you want me to. I'm very happy to keep going.
Please do.
So there's your Travis Perkins estate, one on Excel that I can kind of use in those various different ways in effect.
So assuming with this elite that you're showing me, these 8 different ways.
Yeah.
I assume you can't get these on the essential, or are they restricted to only a certain number of ways of finding property and land to develop on?
Yeah, so in Essentials, what you get is you get the information from the side panels. So you get the information around a particular property. So Essentials is kind of aimed at a kind of a reactive tool where you can drive past a site and go, oh, that's kind of an interesting location. Who owns it? What's going on with it, in effect?
Okay.
So if I kind of just zoom in on, we'll pick a random Travis Perkins. I bet I choose the wrong one. Looks like I'm choosing the wrong one here, but we'll go with it in effect. So if the fact that Travis Perkins or one of their kind of group companies here is there, means it's kind of interesting for us, then what we can then do is go and start searching around that location. And the free version will do that for you in effect. So if I want to go and target properties that are on kind of a location that Travis Perkins are at, then this is showing me that, and kind of who owns the estate over the road, and kind of put something else in there. Well, there's Avon Capital Estates that have got that owned in 2011, and there's their address. And so in the free version, you can certainly do a lot of that, and you can go and buy copies of leases and all this sort of stuff.
So it's more geared around just purely ownership. If you're wanting to know who owns that particular entity, whether it's the land or the build itself.
It will show you site sizes. It'll show you then things like rates assessments, so kind of sizes. It will show you things, well, in this case, there's a flooding issue, so I can go and see there's a flood problem, so I can go and kind of click on the link, and it will take me through and show me kind of where that flooding issue sort of sits across the sort of the back of the front of the site, the back of the site, so down this bottom bit here in effect. It shows me there's kind of it's actually an AOMB, this particular property, area of outstanding natural beauty. So in Elite, it's sort of showing me this, and I can kind of toggle that onto the map, and it will sort of show me kind of where that affects in effect. So whether it's the whole site there's a problem, and kind of where does that planning constraint stop, if you like.
What's on that topic? You just mentioned it shows a flood plan. Is this tool also being used by insurance companies?
Yes.
It is. Okay, brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the free version, say that's what you can do, and so you can buy those leases. You can sort of then see some of the information around, in the case of this, some of those constraints that are kind of going to affect. If I was thinking about redeveloping this, then obviously the fact it's AOMB and this sort of stuff is going to sort of slow that plan down in effect. But then some of the other things that are perhaps helpful with it are kind of then looking at things like what are the qualities of areas. So we have this little overlay that sort of shows you the quality of the area that I'm looking at. So kind of the hotter the colour, the higher the residential values.
Okay.
So I can see here the average price around here is £330 a foot. And kind of as I go further north, it's 380. So actually, it's kind of a 20% difference in value as you sort of cross this little border here up into this area at the top here, in effect. And then sort of within that, so I suppose sort of the Elite and the Essentials platforms, they number one help you find opportunities, but then number two is help you understand that kind of local knowledge nationally. So kind of what's going on in a particular area, and where are those kind of good parts of town and where are those bad parts of town.
Demographics also, of the area.
Yes, exactly that. Yeah, exactly that. And then kind of within that, it also shows you things like the sort of, this is in West Oxfordshire. So actually, if I go into the exports over here, we can do this planning export where I can type in West Oxfordshire district and then look for residential opportunities across West Oxfordshire, and perhaps I might do Oxford 2 or something like that. Let's do Oxford district as well, just that one. And in essence, what the system will do is go off and find planning applications around that. And I suppose this is kind of almost coming on to number 3 or number 4 of the 8 that we're at, where in essence you can go off and within the planning information, are there sites that have had a recent refusal? So is there having a look at those planning refusals in effect, and saying what were the reasons for that. Looking at the decision document, saying what are the reasons that planning application got refused. Obviously, there's an owner there that submitted the planning application, spent all that money on trying to get a planning consent, and then found they then haven't managed to get that consent. And actually, some of the reasons you have the sort of a refusal can actually be quite simple. So it's layout, it's design, and those sorts of things that actually you can go in and change in effect. So we can kind of do that through the planning export, and that'll kind of show us those. Equally, the sort of some stuff has got a recent consent, then at the same time, can you go and buy it and build it in effect? Or stuff that's then sat pending or sort of waiting for a decision, then of course you can go and you can in effect try and buy that switch to planning and go and, if you get your consent, I'll pay you this for that particular property in effect. Okay. So within this, my Excel will be playing games today. In effect, so in effect you have this output here where you can then look at that in Excel, put some filters on it, where you sort of see the link through to the council's website where that planning application was. There's your proposal, sort of talking about the redevelopment of this one here for 4 residential units. That's pending, submitted a few months ago. There's the address of it. That's the title that it's sat on. It's owned by Whitney Travel Limited. There's their address. They bought it in 2001 in effect. And so you can kind of work through that list and say, well, actually, if I want to see stuff that's refused, we just type in refused. So there's your kind of refused applications. 3 dwellings, 5 Elms Road or whatever it is, and you click that link, go and take you through and go and see it on Nimbus, or go and see the application itself and say, well, why was that application refused in effect? Look at the decision document and understand that in effect. So it's kind of just taking you straight through to go and see that particular application, and then sort of decision document will tell us kind of why it was.
Okay, so it takes you directly to the local authority's website rather than a planning portal.
Exactly that, yeah. So it takes you through to the portal, kind of the actual location of the thing there. So that's kind of the overdevelopment is kind of the point. So if you reduce the density of those proposed dwellings, then that may well, so you took 3 down to 2, you may well get a consent on that. And obviously the owners suddenly going, well, I didn't get a planning consent, and actually you could try and unlock that. Kind of really quick and simple ways of doing that in effect.
Perfect.
That'll make sense. So we sort of
yes, it does.
I suppose the key things that we've talked about. There are within that kind of looking at equally looking at kind of if I was going to do a residential development in this particular location, then one of the key things is trying to understand the residential values, and actually we can kind of do some very simple things with picking out where the properties here have sold in the last few months, or the last few years rather. So sort of getting. So
is this 0.5 out of the 8?
Yeah, this is sort of looking at if I'm going to do a residential scheme in West Oxfordshire, kind of what's that local values in effect. And that's kind of showing us here that property sold in August 2018, and we can kind of export that into Excel again, which then sort of shows us sort of links through to Rightmove to go and see the particular property that's sold and rates per square foot and this sort of stuff. So kind of just pinning down what the exit values are in a particular location as we're using our kind of 8 ways to find land in effect. So showing us the these kind of rates per square foot down here in effect. So
you mentioned Rightmove as assuming it also captures all the other leading online platforms for selling and letting properties, such as Zoopla and On the Market. Is that right? Or
so we just link through to Rightmove at the moment.
Just Rightmove,
just in terms of trying to get those residential comps, we just find they're an easy place to link through to, and we find that it works well from our point of view. No reason why we don't use the others as well, but perhaps we should, but we haven't as yet.
Which is fine, because Rightmove is the leading one that most investors use at present. So so we kind of just sort of jump back onto so in essence that's kind of where there's sort of 2 ways you can kind of understand the sort of the exit values, if you like. I think we're on point 4 of the ways to find land. Point 4, okay.
I think we've done 4 of them. I've got a little slide here that we'll jump back to in effect.
But okay, brilliant.
In effect, these are the ways in which we can sort of find land, and We've done 3 of them actually. I can kind of keep going, but I'm conscious I've sort of demonstrated quite a lot of the platforms.
Yeah.
So,
well, you can stop if